Hello, and welcome to another episode of Death by Bunjie. This episode of Death by Bunjie is the shot analysis for the Maryland buck. Now, if you've been following Death by Bunjie, I hope you're subscribed. You'll remember that last week I posted the video where I lost my Maryland buck. And the title of that video, of course, was Bunjie Loses a Deer in Maryland. And it was correctly pointed out to me that that kind of goes against what I've been saying here on Death by Bunjie. Bunjie didn't lose a deer in Maryland. I lost a deer in Maryland. You have to take responsibility for these things. I don't like blame the equipment. Ultimately, I'm responsible for whatever equipment I choose to use when I go out hunting, and therefore, if something goes wrong, it is my fault, and I try to take responsibility for it. That, in my experience, is the first step toward correcting whatever problems exist, making sure that we don't have those problems going forward. I've said that time and time again here on Death by Bunjie, and Maryland this year, for me, was no exception. When I went to Maryland this year, it seemed like a layup of a shot, 20 yards. The deer was broadside. The deer was, for the most part, stationary, hitting a corn pile, just asking to be shot. I couldn't ask for a better opportunity going to Maryland. I couldn't ask for a better opportunity here in Pennsylvania. With crossbow hunting, that was a perfect shot. So what went wrong? First things first, what are we looking at here? I mentioned before that the way I look at deer anatomy, I have that little thing called the Bunjie triangle, and it's just something I made up. It's just my way of thinking about it. I actually didn't name it the Bunjie triangle until I shot a video about it, and I actually kind of made up the name Bunjie triangle, kind of named it after the Bermuda Triangle, I guess. I don't know. But I came up with that name, actually, when I made that video. Check out that video if you haven't seen it already. It might help you get a grip on deer anatomy, especially if you're new to crossbow hunting. I think there are a variety of ways to look at it. This is just my way to look at it. This is the way I organize that shot in those crucial seconds when you're trying to set up a shot. That's the way that I do it, and that's the reason I made that video. If you look at this deer as it's coming in, that deer is giving me a nice broadside shot, just what we're looking for. The Bunjie triangle, if we apply that to the shot, and I'm going to do some of this on the computer. I've got the computer here. I'm going to go through and I'm going to set that up and show you on the computer screen how this works for me and how I was thinking about this shot. And as we go through this, I hope you can give me your thoughts in the comments about what you think went wrong with the shot. Where was the shot placement? Was it good, bad? What do you think was the reason why I did not recover that deer? That sort of thing. Now, if you haven't seen this video already, if you haven't seen the video where I shot this deer and where I lost this deer, go check out that video. It'll give you the whole story, the whole background on the shot and on that evening of taking the shot, as well as the next day trying to find and locate that deer. Just to sort of recap that here, however, the deer gave me a perfect broadside shot. The deer was, for the most part, stationary. I took the shot. It felt as though it went a little bit low, but looking at it again on the video here, when you look at the computer screen, when you look at the video, it looks like it was a pretty solid shot. And I definitely got a pass through because the arrow you can see the luminoc on the ground. It lights up after the deer leaves. So I got a pass through on this deer, and nonetheless, that deer ran out of the area and took off. I looked a little bit for blood that night. If I didn't find a really good blood trail, I wasn't going to go try and push that deer, because if it was just bedded down, I wanted to just stay there. I didn't want to risk pushing that deer further. However, when I just took the initial look around the area, I didn't find any blood. So I backed out, came back the next morning, still found no blood, no sign of that deer's trail. Ended up doing a grid search. What's a grid search? To me, that's when you start walking, and this is sort of your last-ditch effort. You're basically looking for white bellies at this point. We're looking for a dead deer. And I walked to the entire length of the property where I had access. Then I went along the property line and came back the other way, where I could see both sides of my trail, at least to where I had been before on the first pass, and then looking ahead to the next pass, and then just sort of zigzagged. Using my phone as a guide, I went through to see where I'm located, went back and forth like this, gridding across that whole property, covering all of it that I could see, looking for signs of deer running, looking for signs of blood, or looking for, preferably, a white belly. If you could find a deer, then that would have been great. No luck, did not find that deer. So let's play it back a little bit. Where were we at here? What happened here? When I look back at this shot, first of all, leading up to that shot, I knew I was going to get a shot at one of these 3 young bucks. To me, I am in Maryland. I am traveling 5 hours to hunt down there, and I am not managing the property. I have permission to shoot pretty much anything that comes in front of me, and so I'm not picky. To me, 3 bucks came in. They were all young bucks. I wasn't going to wait to get a shot on any of the 3. The first one that presented a shot, that was the one I was going to take a shot at. And that's exactly what I did. One comes in, he gets pushed off the pile by the second deer, the one that I ended up taking a shot at. And as you can see, he puts his head down on that pile. He's giving me a nice broadside shot. It is a clear shot through the branches. There's a nice opening in the branches. The GoPro camera, I mentioned this before, the actual footage of this is being filmed below me. I'm sitting in a one-man tree stand looking over off to my left, over that corn pile. And the GoPro is actually below my knee. I could see it right there and control it right there by my knee. But so I'm shooting over the GoPro, so to speak. So that's the camera angle we have with this shot. That deer comes in, I size up the triangle. I think of it in terms of that Bunjie triangle. I did another video on that. And as he's easing forward, the way I'm looking at that shot is I basically want to stay about halfway up. This is a 20-yard shot, so it's not a steep angle. He's not just 10 yards away. It's a pretty light angle for me, not much of an angle of a shot at all. So to me, I feel pretty comfortable going about halfway up the deer's body, halfway up that triangle. So I'm sort of in the point of that triangle because I want to sort of hug the shoulder, the front leg. I want to hug the front leg if I can and get in the front part of that pocket, the front part of that triangle. It gives me the best chance of hitting those crucial arteries that come out of the deer's heart, that go into the lungs, and giving you an all-around good shot. If I'm off a little bit, maybe I shoot low, I hit the heart. If I shoot high, I get the lungs. Either way, you're doing damage to that deer and you're going to have a short blood trail. At least that's the expectation. That was my plan. Not all things go according to Hoyle, or not all things go according to plan, as you might know. And sure enough, what happens is that deer, he's stationary on that pile. He is not alert. He doesn't know I'm there. Nonetheless, he's easing forward. I like to pause a little bit before I pull the trigger. The reason I do that is to make one last assurance that I'm not having any parallax in my scope. When I'm looking through there at that deer, I like to make sure that I'm not having any parallax in the scope and that I've got a nice clear shot, that I'm looking at the reticles perfectly centered within the scope's view. And as I'm doing that, pull the trigger, the arrow gets there, that deer moves forward very slightly. So I think what happened here, based on that, is that my shot was off a little bit because that deer was easing forward. That deer was just pulling forward a little bit. Now you can see the way that this deer is positioned because he is crouching down to eat that corn. He's got his head lowered to eat that corn. His tail end's a little bit higher in the air. And as he's moving forward, I think I'm getting under the lungs there, maybe in front of the liver, and that's where the shot goes. That shot placement may look good, but unfortunately, keeping in mind that we're taking a 3D view and that shot comes down on that deer, it doesn't go straight through the deer at that height. It kind of goes down and probably it might graze the liver. I don't know. I could have gotten one lung and the liver. That's certainly a possibility. Either way, I think in the end result, however, this deer doesn't suffer an immediately fatal blow, probably suffers a fatal wound from this, but not one that is going to stop that deer before he leaves the property. Thing about deer is this: even though he suffers a wound like this, even though he gets hit in the vitals, if he's got something where he can only travel for, say, 30 seconds before he has to bed down, deer can run a long ways in 30 seconds, right? A deer, if you get a double lung shot, that deer still, without the ability to breathe, without that ability to take in oxygen, that deer can still go 40, 50, 80 yards sometimes with no lungs, without the ability to breathe. They can go that far on a single breath. That's amazing. That shows you what amazing creatures these deer are. They are fantastic, amazing creatures, and they have an ability to survive despite wounds far beyond what we as human beings can fathom. I firmly believe that. So this deer, despite his wounds, probably was able to travel quite a distance. Now, unfortunately, I'm hunting in Maryland I'm a guest. Not only am I a guest, I have permission from a guide who has a lease to hunt this property, and I have the permission to be there, but I don't have the permission to all the acreage in the entire area. I only have permission to be on a certain area. The following day I came back, and that's when I did that grid search and looked all over for blood, did not find any. So that's the unfortunate part of this. I did search every piece of real estate that I had access to. I just didn't have access to as much property as I would. Here in Pennsylvania, I've talked to my neighbors ahead of time. I'm comfortable enough with them that if I have a deer that runs on their property, I might have to wait until nighttime to do it, but they are not going to object to me going in there to find the deer. And I have told my neighbors flat out that if you shoot a deer and it runs on our place, just let me know and I'll help you go find it. I don't have any problem with that at all. I don't want trespassers, but I certainly want people to find the deer that they have shot, and I'm certainly willing to help in any way I can. I don't have an agreement like that down in Maryland. I'm sort of left to whatever arrangements the guide has. Now, after I take this shot, the first thing I do, of course, is you collect yourself and start packing away the gear. I texted the guide. I wait for my body to calm down. Anytime you take a shot at a deer, I'm usually all got the jitters and everything else. So I'm usually shaking, a little bit nervous and everything else. And the last thing you want to do is, risk getting hurt climbing out of the tree stand or something like that. So I put all my gear away, pack everything away, slowly remove myself from the tree stand, put all my gear on the ground with a rope and all that good stuff. I get myself out of the tree stand and collect myself. And I don't want to push that deer, so I'm very quiet. I'm listening to make sure that nothing's bedded nearby and that there's no problems. And this is about 30 minutes after taking the shot, and then I go inspect the arrow. That's the first thing that I do, is try and locate that arrow. And I look, there is not only no blood on the corn pile or right there visible when I pick up the arrow, but the arrow looks really good. I pull the arrow out. The broadhead had opened, had buried itself in the dirt. That's just the nature of the beast here. But nonetheless, it was very apparent that the broadhead opened. Now, that arrow is coated in blood. Unfortunately, I did not take pictures of the arrow, and I feel like a complete idiot here. I actually took the arrow back to I was kind of a little disappointed. I took the arrow back to the hotel room, and I cleaned it all off. Essentially, it was covered with blood. Now, it was not dark blood like you would see from a liver shot. It also was not bubbly bright blood like you would see from a lung shot. It wasn't anything that apparent to me. There were absolutely no bubbles in the blood on that arrow. So that tells me it was not a clean lung shot, that's for sure. But that arrow had no odor of guts or anything like that. It didn't stink. And that's one way to tell whether or not you got a gut shot. So I know that I didn't hit intestines. I didn't hit far enough back to hit intestines or anything like that. Probably did not get a great shot on the liver, although the blood was there. It wasn't particularly dark. And on a clear and only liver shot, you would have very dark blood. This was just red blood, but there's no bubbles in it, which tells me it wasn't a good shot on the lungs either. Now, still could be some liver in there, still could be some lung shot in there. All of that is still a possibility. It just means that it wasn't a complete pass through the both lungs. It wasn't a complete, it just tells me that it wasn't really a clear shot in any way. I have a pass through, but the other good thing is there's no white hairs on the arrow either, stuck in the blood or otherwise. And that's good news to me, because lots of times what you'll see, if you see a lot of white hair, that tells me that it passed out through the belly, and the bloody arrow, as it passed out through the belly, it pulled some of those white hairs along with it. And that would tell me a really low shot to hit the belly and everything else. There was also no tallow on it, no fat or anything like that. So it wasn't just a brisket shot. It wasn't just a bottom of the belly shot or anything like that. Really an odd thing. I expected to see one of those signs in there, usually some bubbles, something, but it just wasn't that kind of arrow. Not only can I show you how that deer probably moved and it forced that shot back a little bit further than what I was hoping for in that split second or so before I pulled the trigger, before the arrow got there, I can sort of line that up. And another thing we can do is we can back this deer up and we can line him up over that luminoc to see where the pass-through was performed. And we can sort of line up the dot for the pass-through for where the luminoc and the arrow came to rest. And along with the actual shot, if I put those two together, you can kind of see what we've got here as far as the path of that arrow. Now, anytime you're looking at that, it's not 100% accurate, because remember, the luminoc's on the end of the arrow. It's not the end of the arrow that made contact initially with the deer. So that doesn't necessarily, sometimes those arrows will hit and they'll move the luminoc. Wherever that luminoc ends up, it's on the end of the arrow. And that may not be completely in a straight line. It may have hit the ground and turned a little bit or something like that. But generally, we can sort of line it up. And you can see that it's really not that low a shot either. So that's what we're dealing with here. We got this shot. It goes a little bit low and a little bit back, and it's just not in the correct part of the triangle that I'm looking at, but it's also not right in the perfect spot of the vitals. If you needed proof of that, the fact that I didn't find that deer is proof of that. The deer's reaction, that's another important thing we can look at here. In the video, if you're not videoing your hunts, you're missing an opportunity to sort of evaluate your shots later on. So watch some of my other videos on filming your own hunts and get out there and film those hunts. It's such a great tool to sort of analyze and make sure you're doing something better next time or whatever. Even on the ones where I recover the deer, I watch it and I replay it and I make sure that I diagnose that shot and know what I'm doing. I think it makes you better later on down the road. I don't by any stretch of the imagination think I'm an expert at this stuff, and I want to reinforce that every time. I feel like I should say that in every video. I really, really do like it, and I really am striving to be the best crossbow hunter I can be. And this is just another tool, another way to hopefully make that happen. But the deer's reaction on this video, if you look at that, you get a chance to see some more information, some more evidence about what was going on with that shot. Now this deer, he kicks and reacts to this arrow exactly the way you would hope that a deer would kick and react to an arrow. Watch, as soon as that arrow gets there, his reaction is to kick like a mule. He puts both of his hind feet up and moves forward, just like we're hoping to get. Typically, if you read up on this online or if you've experienced this kind of a shot, that's what I'm always hoping for, and you see that an awful lot with double lung shots, with heart shots, any of those really vital up front in the vitals types of shots. If you made a good shot on a deer, that's 9 times out of 10 going to be the reaction you get from that deer. And if that shot was just low, in my experience, those deer jump straight up. That's going to be the reaction you get. And that's not what we want to see. Why did I not find that deer? Why didn't we find a blood trail? Now that is particular. Now that's particularly confusing to me, and that's unfortunate and doesn't make me real happy. That's what I've been sort of asking myself, and that's the other thing that I'd like to have you comment on. How come there was no blood trail? Why didn't I find any blood to track? I didn't even get some blood to track. I'd like to at least get a start following that deer. And all I can sort of gather now, I looked all over that area, and the other thing too is I went back to the hotel room, watched this video, and you can see that this deer launches himself off between those two trees, between that little mossy area. I went back and I inspected personally that mossy area and did not find any blood or sign of a deer on that mossy area or the trees that are right around that area as well. Looked all through there. And then I walked in the direction from the video where you could tell where those deer had headed, and I did not find it. I saw some scuff marks that probably indicated where the deer had run and got me started in the right direction. But after that, I was completely unable to locate any blood. More than likely what that means is I just simply didn't hit any vitals and there wasn't enough blood. I didn't hit an artery or anything that's pumping blood to throw blood out of those holes in any measurable way. That's probably the reason that there wasn't any blood there. However, I don't know if that's the whole story. You might recall a couple years ago I shot a doe. There was no blood trail whatsoever, and I made a great shot on this doe. It was from a blind, shooting level, 20 yards, perfect shot under the apple tree. Killed that doe, it ran off, and I found her 40 yards from the apple tree. Only found her by grid searching, only found her by looking for the body. Could not find any blood, and neither could my nephew, who was helping me look. You can check that video out here on YouTube as well. No luck in that particular search looking for blood. And the reason for that was her entrails, on the way out, that arrow kind of created a little bit of a vacuum and pulled just enough of her entrails. It didn't hit her entrails, but it moved just enough of her body, of her internal organs, to cover that hole to keep the blood in there. So the blood all pools up inside the carcass. A deer carcass is just like a bucket. It'll hold as much blood as you put in there. So that's always an issue, right? You do have that problem. Would a bigger hole, a bigger broadhead have made a difference? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on that. You know my thoughts on broadheads. There's nothing fancy about it. I just use whatever the manufacturer recommends. But I'm always curious when something like this happens. If I used a bigger broadhead, would it have made a difference? Maybe it would have. So what do we take away from this? What do I learn from this? What am I going to do differently going forward, if anything? Now, one thing I'm not going to do is blame the equipment. It's not the broadhead's fault. A perfectly placed shot would have brought this deer home, just like it has in so many instances before. Someone on Facebook, I think it was, maybe it was YouTube, had actually suggested to me, hey, did you check to make sure that your broadheads fly the same as your field points. And yes, I do check that. But I've been using the same brand of broadhead for multiple seasons now, for 4, 5, 6 seasons or something, I don't know. So I've been using the X-Act from Excalibur for a long time. I have no reason in my practices or in my tests or in my hunting experiences to suggest that they fly differently than the field points. And in this case, the shot wasn't far enough off for me to think otherwise either. The shot, I think, is the reason the shot didn't go tight to the shoulder was simply because the deer was moving forward a little bit, and I took that little extra second to sort of collect myself before I pulled the trigger. So I don't think there's any question here about the accuracy of the broadheads, but that is worth mentioning, that if you have new broadheads, if you switch to new broadheads, you cannot be satisfied with the idea that, yes, they fly the same as my field points. Don't just assume that they do. Broadheads there's all makes and models, and they all fly different, so be careful of that. But I am very curious to hear how you think that this bad shot can be explained, how the lack of a blood trail can be explained, and if you have any other comments or suggestions about this shot, let me know. I can take it. I am anxious to hear what you have to say. No one is a bigger critic of me than me. So, but be that as it may, just be polite. But with that in mind, I am anxious to have a dialogue about this. If there's something that you want me to, or something I didn't think about, something I didn't cover, please let me know. I will do another video here in the very near future about how to deal with losing a deer. This isn't the first deer that I have ever lost. It will not be the last deer that I ever lose. I am sure of that. There's no guarantees in this business other than eventually you're going to lose deer. It's just the way it goes. It's part of hunting. Basically, my take on this is sticking with the Bunjie triangle, so to speak, and then also focusing more on the lack of movement and confidence that arrow is going to go where I want it to go. Those are the takeaways for me, but I'm anxious to hear what you have to say as well. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Death by Bunjie. Subscribe if you haven't already. Check out our Facebook page because I always give updates on there, including updates about this hunt. The people on the Facebook page knew about this hunt long before I posted the video on YouTube. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, check that out as well. And until next time, all hail Bunjie!